Research shows that it's not 7 dog years for every human year. As we often talk about in society, I'm sure you've heard this out there that 1 human year equals 7 years in a dog's life. And recent research has found that's just not true, at least for Labrador retrievers. So let's take a look at this article from CNN that talks about this research. So in the article, they say that a popular method of saying how old your dog is to multiply the dog's age by 7 to compare how old they are to you as a human, or to humans in general. But now researchers have begun developing a new formula for calculating the age of your dog that's much more accurate in terms of the actual aging process of a dog, which is different than our aging process, of course. And so I just want to highlight a couple of things from this article. So first of all, a 9-month-old dog can have puppies. Okay, so obviously, almost 7-year-old human cannot generally have children, but a 9-month-old dog can already have puppies. So that 1 to 7 thing is already kind of starting to slip just by seeing that process play out. And so the researchers point that out, but what they did is they looked at the changing patterns of methyl groups in the genome of Labrador retrievers to get a more accurate estimation of their age in terms of comparing it to human age. And so I think that's interesting, but just remember that a 9-month-old dog can have puppies, so clearly it's not just 6 or 7 years old at that point. And so based on the study that these researchers did, a 1-year-old dog actually compares to a 30-year-old human. So when your dog turns 1, it's already 30 years old in human years. Not 7, not 6, not 12. It's actually 30 years old already. And I actually think this is really interesting. It also goes on to say that a 4-year-old dog compares to a 52-year-old human. So by the time that dog is 4, it's already 54 years old in human years. And then it kind of ages slower after that. So it kind of stays the same kind of age range for a lot longer. And so what's interesting about this for me is not just about dogs and even cats. We talk about cat years too. What's really interesting about this for me is kind of the way that it kind of highlights the human experience of life. And so what I mean by that is, a lot of like reptiles, for example, they have their offspring and they're already kind of fully functioning adults almost immediately after they're born. And I think that's really interesting. And I think the fact that humans have a large prefrontal cortex and it takes so long for our brains to fully develop, I think that is a big part in what makes us human and what makes the human experience of life so different from other animals. And so we have to raise our kids for a long time. In the United States, you're kind of considered an adult at age 18, which is a long time. That's a lot of years, when a reptile can have a baby and it's already an adult basically right away. And it looks like a dog can have puppies, and 9 months later, their kids can have kids. And after a year, it's already basically a 30-year-old compared to like a 30-year-old human. And so I think the fact that we have these large brains is a huge benefit to human beings, obviously. And at the same time, it's also a liability. It causes female bodies to be shaped a certain way, which may be disadvantageous for some activities, for example. Also, we have to raise kids for a long time because their brain is not fully formed when they're born. I think the current research says that your brain continues to kind of grow and shape and form until you're actually, I think, 25 years old or so, not just 18. So in the United States, we have this idea of like 18 is kind of when you become an adult, or 21 because of the drinking age or whatever. But really, it's more like 25 when we finally kind of become like a fully formed, fully functional adult with our brain completely developed in terms of the basic level is all there and all the connections have been made. So I think that's really interesting that it takes us 25 years for our big brain to kind of fully develop. And that is basically a huge reason why our lives are the way we are. So just imagine this. This is so fun for me. Like, I just want you to imagine for a second, like if we were more like reptiles and you could have a baby and then like 2 days later or a year later, it's already going off to college and it's fully formed adult. We can't even imagine that because it's such a big part of our life experience to grow up, and also for most people who have children, to raise children. That's such a big part of our experience because it has to be. when you're born, you're not fully formed. You can't take care of yourself. You're not an adult yet. But most other animals don't have that long of a period where they're not adults yet. And again, in some animals, it's right away. In a dog, it looks like they're basically already a 30-year-old human at 1 year old. And of course, there's limitations to other species too. They don't have as big of a prefrontal cortex. They can't plan for the future as well. They can't do a lot of stuff that we can do. But at the same time, it comes at a tremendous cost. I mean, our brains eat up most of our energy that we consume. We have to raise kids for at least 12, 16, 18 years, and maybe even 25. And so that is a big reason why we have like certain chemicals and emotions, and we feel attached, and like we have to really, like, a lot of people say that the love they feel for their children is unlike anything else they've ever experienced. And a big part of that is because you have to raise them for such a long time that you have to have some kind of chemical attachment to be able to do that. And I think it's really, really interesting. So I just always think about like, wow, what would our life be like if we could have a child with maybe a shorter gestation period too, and they're fully formed adults after a year or even right away? What would happen if you could basically give birth to a child and then just walk away and it will be completely fine, and we don't have those chemical attachments? What would human life be like if we could live that way, and maybe the brain could form in a different way or something like that? What would human life look like if we were able to be fully formed adults a lot sooner in our lives? I think that's what this study kind of really highlights for me in terms of what's interesting about the varying ages of humans and other species. And I would really like them to expand this work. So right now they just did the study with Labrador retrievers, and they're going to expand it for other breeds of dog so that we can better take care of the dogs and kind of understand how old they really are in terms of what we might experience at the same age, so we can take better care of them. And I think that's really cool. And at the same time, I would really love to see these researchers do this same kind of thing with a lot of other species. And I would love to have kind of like an index of comparing other species' lifespans more accurately to human lifespans, and say like, oh, that gecko over there is 6 months old. That means he's 57 in human years or whatever. I would really, really love to have like an index comparing what an animal might experience in terms of the same number of years as a human experiences. So I think this research is really interesting. I think that we can learn something about ourselves by doing it. And it's really interesting that when your dog is 4 years old, it's actually a 52-year-old human. And so we kind of take it out, and maybe it doesn't want to run so fast anymore. Maybe it does. I don't know. Maybe it's a really young feeling 54-year-old human dog compared to a 54-year-old human at that same kind of age as a dog. But it kind of helps us be more empathetic towards the animals that we care about and that we love. And so I think they should expand this research, not only just to learn about other animals, but also to compare them to human life and figure out what we can learn about ourselves through this research. I think that's the most interesting thing, at least for me. And so it's so interesting to think about like how we age so slowly and the sacrifices that we all make to have this large brain in the prefrontal cortex. And you know, dogs, they have the mammal brain too, so they feel emotions. They just don't have that big prefrontal cortex in the front. And I'm also wondering about dolphins, you know, because dolphins have a big brain, maybe even bigger than ours. I'm not 100% sure. And I think other species have large brains too with the prefrontal cortex. So I'm curious as to how this relates to those species as well. Do they also have a long childhood like we do? Is it shorter? Is it longer? Like, is a 2-year-old dolphin the same as a 2-year-old human, or is it like a 14-year-old human? I want to know more about how old different species are and what that means for human beings as well. I think this is really interesting. And so just keep in mind that from now on, you can't say that a 1-year-old dog is 7 years old actually in human years, because that's just not true. A 1-year-old dog, at least Labrador retrievers, are actually 30 years old already. It's just so hard for us to comprehend that, because even that 7-year gap is really difficult for us to translate. But it's almost impossible for our brain to kind of wrap our head around a dog being 30 years old already, basically at 1 year old, because we age so differently than dogs, and we have such a long childhood, and we have to take care of kids for so long before they can take care of themselves. So I think this is really interesting and says a lot of interesting things about what it means to be a human being and how we experience life. And so with that, let's keep asking questions like this, and I will see you next time.